Uh, Good evening and welcome to the Massachusetts Historical Society third movie club. Since this is still a relatively new project, it's worth mentioning that the idea for the movie club is that it'll be like a book club. We'll pick a movie every month, people watch it on their own, and then we get together to have a discussion. Unlike your average book club, we'll supply experts to help understand and verify the stories told in the movies. This evening, we'll discuss the 2019 film Little Women, and we are joined by two experts who will help guide our discussion and answer questions. As I'm sure many of you know, the Massachusetts Historical Society hosts a variety of public programs, seminars, and teacher workshops throughout the course of the year. We also make amazing resources in our collection available to researchers through our reading room and through our publications. We offer many of these programs for free or at very modest costs, but we're only able to do this thanks to the support of our members and donors. If you enjoy being a part of our movie club, we hope you'll also consider being a member of the MHS to support our work. Now, to begin our conversation, we will be joined by Jan Turnquist and Heather Rockwood. Ms. Turnquist is the founder and director of Interact Performances, an organization devoted to the impact that living history presentations can have in the worlds of education, business, and personal enrichment. Ms. Turnquist is an educator, actress, and historian. She holds her teaching certificate and degrees in English and comparative literature from the University of Wisconsin. Now a consultant to Old Orchard House Museum, where Louisa May Alcott wrote Little Women. She spent 18 years on the staff there as a living history coordinator, education coordinator, and history interpreter. She's also joined by Heather Rockwood. Ms. Rockwood began her career in museums 12 years ago at the Old State House, now Revolutionary Spaces, giving tours while becoming enamored with Boston's history. She has since moved into marketing and communications for museums through the Newport Historical Society and is now a staff member at the Massachusetts Historical Society. She's always enjoyed reading a little too much and movies even more. Her interests collide in Little Women with a female author from Massachusetts having sisters and the main character always being a little too much hits home in all the best ways. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jan to get us started and then to Heather.
Well, I should begin by saying that because nothing dies on the internet, through no fault of yours, I'm sure, some very old information popped up. For the last 22 years, I've been executive director of Louisa May Alcott's Orchard House. The information that you read was what I did before that. So you have a very long history on me. But my job as executive director of Louisa May Alcott's Orchard House is why I ended up asking to be consulted on this Gerwig film. I had a lot of interaction with all the actors. I was fortunate to be an extra in the film as well. And prior to that, the film that was made 1 year earlier on Masterpiece for PBS was shot in Ireland, and I was there for a month consulting on that. So there's an interesting small comparison there, but I know most of the discussion today will probably center on the Gerwig film, which I thought was utterly fascinating. I am amazed at Greta Gerwig's take on it. And maybe I should tell to everyone a little anecdote that I told a moment ago, because it's sort of a nice starting point, I think. I was privileged to be able to see a preview of the Gerwig film before it was launched publicly. I was surprised. I did not know that Greta Gerwig would be at that screening. And before the film was shown, she was very sweet, very humble, talking about how excited she was. She said she felt like she was at her wedding, getting ready to launch this. She hoped everyone, it was a very small group who was going to watch it, hoped we'd all like it. She said that she had been passionate about Little Women all her life. And to make this film and to be able to write the script and to direct it was a dream come true for her. And at the end of that screening, I was so amazed by what she had done. I turned to the person next to me and said, "This is Greta Gerwig's love letter to Louisa May Alcott." And that is really how I continue to feel. But I'm open for questions, and I know Heather may have some thoughts she wants to share right now.
Yeah, I'm here more to give a little depth to the conversation in the way to compare some of the movies. of course, the two that are closest to my heart are the 2019 Greta Gerwig version and the 1994, we'll call it the Winona Ryder version. I really love how different these two films are and how they both represent the books in the book in a really great way, but it's so very different emotionally. I really love the 2019 one because even from the very start, the very first scene where you see Jo right outside the door of the office, and she's just like breathing, and she's trying to like steel herself for going in to present her story, and it's showing you that this is going to be an emotional journey, and you're going to be carried by the characters through their emotions, and that's how they're going to tell the story. Whereas in the 1994 version, right away, Winona Ryder starts being a narrator, even though she doesn't continue to be a narrator throughout the movie. It just shows you the exact way that those two movies just keep their through line of stories in the emotions and in the narration. I think the 2019 version is really for people who have read the book. I actually tried to show the two movies to my 9-year-old daughter recently, and we watched the 1994 version, and she was like, "This is great. This is a great story. I love all the sisters. I wish I had so many sisters." And then we started the 2019 version, and she was like, "I'm confused. What is happening? Why are they going back and forth? I don't understand." And she knew the story already. So I really think that the 2019 one is for those who have read the book, and the 1994 version is just for everybody because it really just tells the story in an easy to consume way. The editing and the time hopping shows the emotions and storylines that may not feel connected in a read through of the book or a read through of or a watch of the 1994 version. That's shown especially with Beth's illness, the scenes where it goes back and forth between Beth's two big illnesses dramatized, especially when Jo comes out and sees her at the table, and then when she comes out and she's not at the table, and it's just those two scenes are right next to each other, and it's just brings you through those emotions that Jo is having both times. um, Whereas like in the 1994 version, it's really the story is carried through Jo's eyes. Whereas in the 2019 version, you really see everything through Amy's eyes and then through Meg's eyes. And every time a character is on scene, it's really through their eyes. In 1994, everything is seen through Jo's character. And in the 2019 version, they are talking over each other. All the time there's laughter, one character's laughing, one is crying. It just shows the range of emotions that are happening throughout the family, and they're all happening at the same time, just like a big family would be happening. Whereas in 1994, it's standard movie dialogue, one person at a time. When one person is upset, everybody in the scene is upset. So it shows that as Jan was talking about in a preview to this, that it shows you the way that the film was made in the 1990s and not in 2019, whereas we would see that and go, wow, that is so realistic. And one of my favorite things about the 2019 version is that the way that the talking over each other and the way that the women seem to swoop in, steal the scene, and then swoop out, and the men are just standing there in silence, just leaving them in this deafening emotional hole. That's one of my favorite parts about the 2019 version.
The comment about how the actors are sort of all, their lines are all on top of each other. Saoirse Ronan made a comment about that Greta was like a conductor of a symphony. She wanted that overlap, but it was not really random. It was really orchestrated. And what she was trying to do, and I think you picked up on it absolutely correctly, is bring you into the emotional moment over and over again. And she wasn't very worried about some of the things that classically I think a filmmaker might think about, which is, you know, as you were talking about, sequential, a narrator all through one narrator's eyes, perhaps, or one character's eyes. She was really plunging you in over and over again in different ways to understand the different characters within themselves. And one of the things that I really thought was amazing about the Gerwig film in particular was how Amy who is the one based on the youngest sister, May Alcott. She was Abigail May Alcott, but then as a teenager wanted to switch and have her middle name used. May Alcott was a very strong woman. And I think that comes through in the Gerwig film as in no other production. And I thought that was outstanding, that people could understand. But I really felt like each character in the Gerwig film had a chance to have their inner life almost open up for the viewer to feel over and over again, but in different stages and of course, different characters. Laura Dern's portrayal of Marmee was so distinctive and so very different from the other Marmee characterizations as well. She was someone, I think, she asked me so many questions about the real Mrs. Alcott. And yet at the same time, of course, she was Laura Dern. She was portraying. But I found that so interesting compared to Susan Sarandon. And also, for those of you who might have seen that Masterpiece production, I thought Emily Watson's portrayal of Marmee was outstanding as well. So they're different, these various films, and we could go through many of them, but I think we're mostly focused on those two, Heather, that you brought up. I often think a little bit of the 2018 Masterpiece because it was so close in time. And it was so different in the sense that they had an extremely different set of constraints on them. They had a very low budget. They had to film in Ireland for budgetary reasons. They had to try to make Ireland look like New England. It was tough and very different set of actors. But especially considering those constraints, I thought they did a very credible job. And I would recommend, if you haven't seen that, I think it's streaming. You can get it on PBS, Amazon Prime, I think may have it, different streaming services would have it. But I would say watch that too, especially if you enjoy these comparisons, because these three films are all fairly modern, even though 94 to some people feels like ancient history. That was still a very modern take. A lot of the Alcott's real values that do not necessarily come through in earlier versions, like the Hepburn and the June Allison and who am I leaving out? The very early Hepburn, Allison. There's a third one I'm leaving out right now before Winona Ryder, I think. In any case, the much earlier films were really staying in the 19th century in their attitudes. Whereas in 94, the real Alcott values that were there, I mean, even though they lived in the 19th century, they were way ahead of their time in the way they thought, in what they expected women should be allowed to do. So that comes through in 94 for the first time. And it's, of course, continued in this new Gerwig film as well. So I really thought what you were saying, Heather, was absolutely right on target.
Yeah, and I love how the different characters are portrayed in the 2019 one, like Amy having a voice in this one, whereas before she's just kind of portrayed as the bratty younger sister, and then when she's older, she gets to go to Europe and it's like a big treat for her, and Joe is just ignored at that point. Whereas you really see how the two come together as sisters every time, and they forgive each other constantly. And I really love that coming through in the 2019 version as opposed to the 1994 version.
I think when you said Amy sort of has a voice, I think she has a strong voice. And they do in other ways too. I mean, Meg's voice, it's interesting. If you know the actress, if you know Emma Watson, you know she's playing against type there. But it's still a valid point of view. And I think she brings everything she has to that, to say not everyone is going to be in the forefront of fighting for rights, or, some people are really good at saying, this is where I belong. I'm in this lovely nest of a home taking care of my children. And I think that's been one of the points that people appreciate, not only about this film, but about a wider perspective in general, to say everyone doesn't have to embrace everything. You can have differences.
both Meg and Beth have that point of view, which is opposing to Amy and Joe, whereas they really want to do things with their life. And Meg says, I want to do something. It's very strongly held belief, but it's just different. And Beth, dear Beth, just feels like she has no ambition. And she's like, I just want to be kind, and I want to be here and love my family. And that's my entire goal in my life. And how sweet it would be to have that as a goal in life.
I do.
The
Oh, go ahead.
the 2017 version, the BBC one, that's my favorite part of that one is that they gave Beth a real like storyline, something that you can really bite into, with her needing to find her inner bravery and her mother telling her she needs to find it, but then just standing back and watching her struggle to just cross the street and go play the piano. That just, every time I watch it, it broke my heart. Like, just knock on the door, Beth, just go.
Yes, exactly. Oh, I agree with you so much. That's sort of what I think about all three of these films, that are all quite modern. Even though, like I say, 94 doesn't seem that modern, it really was. They did so much to bring that forward. And then what you just said about Beth and the relationship of Marmee in that version, the PBS version, was so interesting. It was partially just the core of who I think Watson is, the way she portrays things. And then the scene where Beth is dying in that in the PBS version was one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever seen, because Marmee, in the person of Emily Watson, is saying, we're here, you take your time, you rest, and when you're ready, you go. And thinking of a mother saying that to her child, I mean, I just think that Heidi, I have to stop and remember, it was Heidi Thomas. Some of you may know because she wrote the script for Call the Midwife. I thought she did some amazing script writing as well. So as much as I love what Greta Gerwig did, and I do feel like, as I said before, that it was a love letter that Greta wrote to Louisa, the way she did that script was so much out of her emotion and her understanding of the real family behind the marches. She spent a lot of time at Orchard House asking questions, and of course doing a lot of reading ahead of time as well, and wanting, she worked with her set designer, not set designer, that was really the production designer, Jess Goncher, if you know that name, has done amazing work on many, many films. And as a production designer, he was creating a canvas for Greta's vision. And she wanted Orchard House to be sort of, as Jess put it, a sort of a jewel box, a sort of the center of that film as far as a physicality, where they kind of have their anchoring place. And Louisa herself felt that way about Orchard House. It wasn't a perfect house. It was drafty. There were, she called it Apple Slump, but she also thought of it as their anchoring place. It's where they lived the longest. And the bedroom you see behind me is Louisa's bedchamber, where she sat to pen those opening lines of Christmas Won't Be Christmas. So the full circle feeling that I think Greta had, and really I think all of them attempted to be true to the book. But I will say that the latest version had so many choices that tied them very closely to the real story. The fact that they shot everything in Massachusetts, they shot so much of it in Concord and surrounding areas, it did something for them. The actors talked about that. They were staying in private homes where the host moved out and allowed them to stay. And they spent time in the town in Concord. And they spoke about that experience itself did something for them. And then later, when they had their press junket, they chose to do that in Orchard House as well, and came back again to Orchard House. So we, of course, appreciated that very much. But even versions that, obviously the one that we talked about, that was all done in Ireland. They couldn't do that. They were in Ireland. Still, they did I thought, a very credible job.
Yeah, I think so too. I just wanted to ask you one question before we move on to audience questions. What was the least obvious part in the movie that was taken from the author's life that the layperson may not have known, but that you noticed when you watched the movie?
Oh my. I think it may have been, and I'm trying to, I wish I had known you were going to ask me this because I would have looked up this part. It's when Marmee is talking to Joe. Oh gosh, I'm trying to remember the exact words, but she really is quoting Louisa May Alcott. Maybe the exact, maybe, do you know what I'm talking about? It's just not there. She's really talking about Joe being strong and that it's not as if she says you're too good for this world at all, but it's a little bit along that line of you can't be bridled. And unfortunately I'm just not going to be able to pull that out. But it was Marmee and Joe talking and Marmee giving Joe really permission to be strong and to be herself and to step out of the stereotype box that she may have felt that society was putting her into. And at another juncture, I could have quoted word for word, but it's been a while since I've thought about that scene.
Well, I'll have to look for it next time.
Yes. Look for Marmee talking to Joe about, and maybe I'll be able to look it up. It may come back.
And it looks like we have a couple of questions. Would you like me to read them, Gavin, or did you want to? Okay. Let's see. Okay, this is from, I can't see the names. Oh, there are some natures too noble to curb, too lofty to bend.
That's it.
I can't read the whole name of who this was from. It might be a Hannah.
That's exactly the quote that I just put. Some natures too, yeah.
Thank you, Hannah.
Yes, brilliant. This is why we're a community.
And it looks like we have Keith to ask a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, good evening. I wanted to comment that Greta Gerwig is assuming that we know the story in her movie. And that's how it's possible for us to jump back and forth like that. My 20-year-old granddaughter loved it and had no trouble at all following it. So maybe when your daughter gets a little older, she'll be able to do that too. My question is the scene where Joe and Marmee are talking about anger. And Joe says, but Marmee, you're never angry. And she says, I'm angry every day, but I've learned to curb it and control it. And I think she's encouraging Joe to go ahead and be angry when she's angry. And it doesn't have to be curbed. That's a great message, I feel.
I agree with you. I also want to make a tiny comment on where you began. I think you're right. And also Heather alluded to this too, that if you're very familiar with the story, you don't have trouble going back and forth. But actually, the clues are there. The lighting changes depending on which time frame you're in. If you notice Joe's hair, you remember, oh, she's cut her hair, it's short now. Oh, it's long again, we're back in time. But not everyone tunes into those kind of changes. But I think Greta meant for it to be able to be followed by the very observant film goer, even if they hadn't read the book. But you're correct. If you've read the book and you know the story, then you really don't have a problem.
I'm Peter Ambler, and Jan and I shared the stage in Concord for the production of Little Women in 2012. And to prove it, I've got, okay, I'm holding up the mug from the 2012 production with all the entire cast printed on the back.
And Peter, who did you play?
I played Mr. Lawrence and the grandfather, yes. And I And Meg is ruminating about how somebody is very handsome and more handsome than Mr. Lawrence, and I come in behind her and say, "So I'm not as handsome as," I can't remember who it is. Anyway,
Her grandfather.
The grandfather. Yes, I'm the grandfather.
Well, and you did a very fine job as Mr. Lawrence. I felt very privileged to play Marmee. For those of you who don't know, the Concord Players began in 1932, putting on a production of Little Women. And then their plan was, we're going to do this every 10 years. Well, they didn't do it in 1942 because of the World War, but they did it in 52, 62, 72, 82, 92, 2002, 2002. And they're due to do it again. And the new production, when it comes out, they're doing it a little different month of the year this time around, I believe, but it will be the musical version. So, and that's—
Oh, good.
Yeah.
That'll be interesting.
But you are a fine Mr. Lawrence.
Appreciate it. Thank you. So are you. My memories are a little hazy of it, but it was a wonderful production, and I enjoyed doing it.
I enjoyed it as well.
Thank you, Peter. And it looks like Janka, is it just Jan who has unmuted?
Yes. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I couldn't figure out how to unmute it. Yes, I had a question that made this a difficult film for me in a lot of ways. I mean, I liked that it brought the emotions in, but I felt that it eliminated a lot of the things like the Civil War part, which we saw really nothing of, you know, the horrendous battlefield things. And I think that's such an important part that I felt really sort of cheated when that really wasn't there. You know, he was just, oh, he's down there, and oh, he comes home and looks perfectly well almost when he gets home. And so that, and I think also I was not happy with it being so, quote, up to date. I mean, I know that that probably brings, you know, maybe younger women can relate to that. But on the other hand, I think it's nice for people to be able to, like, for instance, even the boisterousness and things, you know, when you read the book and you know the time frame of it, it wasn't quite that effusive and open, and she was always knocking against it a bit. But even Marmee was saying, well, but you still have to have some decorum, although you've got to have those visions. And I think that younger people could understand that I mean, I almost felt like I was watching, like, you know, the Valley Girls in the 80s or something. And, you know, that just was a problem for me.
I see. It felt a lot like maybe Clueless.
Yeah.
Which is an updated Emma.
Right.
So maybe this kind of felt like that to you.
Right. I was expecting more like Masterpiece Theater, I guess. And it wasn't, but that's just my feeling.
Were you speaking of both the Masterpiece of this time round and the Gerwig, or just one of those?
I wasn't speaking of, and I'm talking about Masterpiece Theater treatments of classics.
Not the Gerwig, but the Masterpiece.
Yeah, and the more sort of like, well, I always call them the British versions, even if they're American, you know, where it's, you know, you've got Dickens really kind of his time, and they're not made into modern figures like they lived in the 20th century.
Well, it's interesting. Because I thought when you were speaking, you were talking about Gerwig, but now I realize you're talking about Masterpiece. So that's interesting. Now I have to kind of reprocess what you were saying.
Yeah,
but interesting.
Interesting. A version of this, which I don't know whether there is one on Masterpiece. But
I'm sorry.
I said I didn't mean a version of Little Women on Masterpiece. I don't even know whether that exists. I
Oh,
just,
well, yes, there is. There's a masterpiece. And I thought that's what you were.
no, I was referring more to the classical feel of those sort of productions.
But they don't seem
Are
even.
more, I think, more true to the time. They're showing you life then, whereas this was showing kind of life now, but not really. You know, it was more brought up to date in a way that kind of made me uncomfortable. Anyways, enough.
Well, thank you for your comment. If Maddie would like to go ahead.
Yeah, I thought your comment was pretty interesting. I do know I've read a lot about Louisa May Alcott's life, and
And
it is it's interesting to have learned that Louisa actually had a lot more slang in her original version of the novel, but her editors took that out. So she was, you know, way ahead of her time. And her editors said, no, this is too casual and we need to make it way more formal. So that's interesting to note. So I think coming from that perspective, I think that the 2019 version does pay tribute nicely to, you know, just Louisa May Alcott. Like Jan was saying, it is a just a tribute to Louisa May Alcott's life. And I do want to give a shout out to the 1949 version of the movie too, because that was the movie that made me fall in love with the story. I think I was like 11 years old, just watching Turner Classic Movies, and that just opened my world up to Little Women. So I do appreciate the older versions as well. But going back to the 2019 version, I just want to know if anyone else felt this way. I think at the beginning and at the end of the movie was when Greta brought Louisa May Alcott into the story. I felt like Louisa May Alcott was it wasn't necessarily Joe. I think it was her. I think we were actually seeing her at the publishers, you know. So I'm wondering if anyone else felt that way, and if Greta even mentioned that. I'm not sure. I'm curious to know if Greta meant to do that. So
Well, I want to let anyone else answer, but I do have a thought in a minute.
Well, the office of the editor, the window of that office said Roberts Brothers. So that's definitely a clue.
Mm.
And we do have a question from Tracy that also has to do with this. She was wondering if you consulted on any of the Joe publisher printing part of her storyline. The part where Joe saw the book being printed towards the end made me cry with happiness for Joe, having been a fan since I was 7.
No, I didn't have anything to do with any of that. But my comment back to, did I feel that was really Joe? I mean, Louisa. I feel that all the way through both the book and various movies, Joe and Louisa are one and the same. Although, of course, Joe is fictionalized and there are differences. You know, Joe does not go and serve in the war as a nurse, which is what Louisa actually did. Many differences. But in the beginning and in the end of the Gerwig version with the publisher there, and as you say, Roberts Brothers, that was the real publisher that Louisa had for Little Women. I felt like they combined perfectly. So I still felt it was Joe, but I absolutely felt like, you know, it was like a perfect merging of Louisa and Joe. And one thing I did personally think about is that the character of the publisher, who was called Dashwood, and that's a name from the book, but her real publisher was not that way. So I felt like there was a little disservice to him. But that's a minor point in the greater scheme of things. But I did really feel like there was an amazing merging of the two. It's almost like a magical merging, more so than normally you see. Anytime you see Joe March, you sort of know that's Louisa. But this was even more so.
Thank you. Thank you for, yeah, for commenting. Yeah, I love the 2019 version so much. Even though I love the 1949 version, I felt like I related to Jo, I always butcher her name, the Irish actress's name. Saoirse, yeah. Her portrayal of Jo was just, oh, it made me cry. I was crying. I saw it Christmas Day and I just cried in the theater because I especially when she said, oh, I'm just so lonely. And, you know, you want your independence, but at the same time, it's, you long for companionship. So there's just that contradiction or that juxtaposition of having companionship versus being alone that really struck me. So thank you for your comment, and thank you for letting me speak to you all about my thoughts on Little Women.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maddie.
Yeah.
Emma, would you like to go?
Hi, I just did my thesis on Concord and Orchard House, so I was wondering what it was like to bring Hollywood into the historic space.
Well, we were fortunate that when they came in, it was people, not all sorts of equipment, except when they did their press junket, there were some cameras and things, but much less than there would have been for a film. So in that sense, it wasn't the full Hollywood, you know, with all the confusion inside Orchard House. But what was wonderful and amazing to me was how much these actors really wanted to know the real Olcotts and considered them the underpinning for their March family members. Bob Odenkirk, who played father, and I think everyone who saw the film would agree that that is definitely a much smaller role. But he really worked hard and spent 2 hours with me talking about all these things he had read about Bronson Olcott. And if you watch the movie and focus on what Bob Odenkirk, what lines he has and everything, you wouldn't know that necessarily. And yet it was there. And they were all like that. They were all interested in, I didn't have 2-hour conversations with all of them, but they were all interested and wanting this to be an authentic production that reflected the Olcotts, even though they were working through the book Little Women. And it's interesting too, in the sense of, did it feel too modern to the one caller? I can understand what she's saying, but I do think that if she knew Louisa in person, from what I can gather, she might have been a little outraged by Louisa too, because she really was, as someone else just pointed out a moment ago, very fond of slang. And not only was it too informal, but it was, to many, it was just considered very improper. I mean, you can be informal and still be within the range of propriety, or you can just go too far and you're not proper. Young ladies do not behave that way. And that was definitely something that the entire March family, I mean, the entire Olcott family struggled with, that they were always ahead of their time and taking flack for it, and yet trying hard to walk a fine line so that they still functioned within their own time period. So it was a tricky balance they struck, and I think that was what Greta was trying to do in the film.
Great, thank you so much, Emma. I just want to point out that we have some international viewers from Australia and New Zealand and Italy and Rio de Janeiro. So thank you for sneaking this during your work time and for staying up late to watch it. Johnny, if you'd like to go.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Good. First up, thank you for hosting this. It's so fascinating to me. I met Jan years ago. I wrote lyrics for a musical theater piece with Debbie Gibson as Jo and Elaine Stritch as Aunt March. And it's been a long time. It's nice to hear your voice again. And my question is about the nonlinear telling of the story. For me, it was a little difficult at first because I felt missing some of not necessarily character development, but the relationship development, because over time. Do you feel the same? And on the flip side, do you feel that the nonlinear telling actually spotlights things that we might not necessarily be thinking about in a longer form, very by the book interpretation of Little Women.
I'll take that second part of the question first, and I don't know, Heather, if you want to weigh in on this too. I do think that the nonlinear telling of the story gives us something that you might not get otherwise. And I alluded to it before when I was saying it's sort of, I feel that it plunges you in to the inner life of that moment for that character a little more intensely than if it were very linear. That was how it affected me anyway. And the first part of your question, well, maybe Heather was going to address that. I've kind of already forgotten it.
The first part was about how the non-linear telling really doesn't connect the characters to each other. Yeah, I would agree with that because the first thing I did when I was watching it for this was write down my thoughts when I saw all the characters, and they actually showed each character individually, where they were, what they were doing, and they were alone. They weren't there as sisters together. And so if you didn't know the story and didn't know that you were being dropped into it 3/4 of the way through the story, it would be entirely confusing, which is why I don't think it is for especially people who aren't familiar with the story or haven't read the book yet, to drop into that. They'd have to have something before then, just to know, like, why is Jo in New York City and then suddenly when she's with everybody it's like 10 years ago. Like, it's very confusing at first, but then as you get used to it, it makes more sense when you're back and forth, like as Jan said, with the hair being different lengths, with the lighting is different. I noticed it's a little bit more blue in the past, which makes you think it's kind of more dreamlike, that we're actually in the present of when she's in New York, when the story began. So I do agree with you. It is a little jarring at first, but I get used to it very quickly because I know the story, but I can see how other people would just see it and be like, what are they even trying to tell me?
Thank you.
Did you want to add anything, Jan?
No, I think that you covered it well.
Okay. Thank you, Johnny. Sarah, would you like to go next?
Hi there. I'm gonna piggyback on Mr. Ambler. I have my Orchard House mug with me tonight. I appreciated. I grew up on the 1994. I saw it in the theater when I was 11 years old, and it became kind of a Christmas movie. You know, it was very cozy and it was chronological, and so I saw that before I read the book. So I had that kind of foundation before reading the actual book as I got older. And I agree 100% about, Gerwig's take on it. It isn't linear, it isn't chronological, and there is kind of a back and forth between past and present. I will say one thing I greatly appreciated in Gerwig's adaptation is the relationship that was highlighted between Mr. Lawrence and Beth, that I really feel didn't come out in 1994. And when you read that relationship in the book, it's so moving. And I'll try not to get choked up just talking about it right now, because the way that Gerwig portrayed that relationship in her adaptation was just perfect. And when she comes over and she has nothing to say to him other than to give him a hug for the piano that he gave her, it's just so moving. It's just so touching. But my question would be, and this seems to be a big hot topic tonight, is the concept of Gerwig did not take a chronological approach. And I find nothing wrong with that. And I'm very much like the rest of the people in this meeting. It took me a little bit of getting used to. And I have to say, I probably went into the Gerwig adaptation going maybe a little leery because I was so used to the 94. But my question would be is, what motivated Mrs. Gerwig on taking that approach to the film? There's certainly nothing wrong with it. I think it was extremely well done. But what was her motivation in taking that approach to the story?
Well, I never heard her speak about a motivation for that
Okay.
approach. So I can only guess, as anybody else in this whole group could guess at that. I think it would be a fascinating thing for someone to ask her. Because the only thing that I keep going back to is that by doing it that way, you do plunge the viewer into each moment in a way that I think you can't help. Either you're going to just back off and say, I'm too confused, I'm not watching this, or you're going to go with it and experience the moment that character is having a little more intensely. I mean, that's what I took away from it. Now, I don't know if she thought of that, if that was part of it or not. I have no idea.
Well, I see what you're saying, because if you do it chronological, then sometimes maybe you're just kind of glossing over things as they come in order. Whereas if you are doing this in a more like highlighting key elements of the story, you're bound to pay more attention to them. So,
Right.
Yeah.
The other thing I think about is that when we start with Joe, in New York, flashing back, the flashbacks have a particular tone and poignancy that I think all of us, if you think for a moment to back in your own life to something that was very strong emotionally for you, maybe it was a wonderful thing, maybe it was a very sad thing, but when you go back in your mind, there's such power there. The moment doesn't lose intensity with time for certain things. And I feel like that also came through because of these flashbacks, that you saw Joe falling asleep on that train, going back in her mind to what life was before. And there was a real sense in Little Women, but also in the real Olcott family, of this golden band, that the four girls they were a magical quartet, that it was just too wonderful. It could never be broken. And then for it to be broken through death, through marriage, through just life pulling people apart, was poignant for Joe and for Louisa.
thank you. And thank you for welcoming us tonight.
I just want to say that Maddie Thurber, says that it was maybe for shock value. We were all expecting the movie to start with Joe saying, "Christmas won't be Christmas without any presents." And it didn't, so it made us pay attention more. So thank you for asking that question, Sarah. Mark, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, thank you, Heather. And thank you, Jan. It's nice to see you. I'm here with my daughter, Catherine.
Hi, Catherine.
Hi, Catherine. Hi, Mark. Nice
Hi.
to see you again.
Yeah. I wanted to say, Heather, it was said before, the 1994 version is definitely a Christmas movie. And there's one reason for that is because it emphasizes the more sentimental first volume of the novel. The 1949 version of Little Women was not just a Christmas movie, but it was like a Christmas commercial, right? It starts with this scene that was invented where the sisters are shopping for Christmas presents. It was definitely had that marketing angle in mind when it was produced. With the 2019 version of the film, I feel like instead of emphasizing that the very sentimental book first, it's emphasizing the less read book second, right? Because we may tend to think about Little Women as one book, but it's two books, right? And it's that second book that it's being, when Louisa May Alcott publishes it, it has a different feel, right? Like she published that first book and it wrote it in the mode of children's literature, sentimentalism. So when she gets to book second, I feel like that's Louisa May Alcott transitioning into realism. There's more realism in that, I feel, or at least there, at least in both books, you could say there's this tension between sentimentalism and realism. And I think that's one thing that makes the 2019 film so effective as an adaptation of Little Women. It's emphasizing that tension in the structure of the story, right? The going back and forth between the two books. Catherine, Catherine had a question for Jan. Do you want me to ask it? You're a little shy. Okay. Jan, Catherine and I would like to know if you, like what are some of your memories from the day that Catherine filmed in the schoolhouse scene? And maybe you could tell us what you thought of that.
Yes, I think we should first explain just for a moment that the scene in Little Women, in the Gerwig Little Women, where Amy is in school, was filmed on the premises of Orchard House property. It was in the School of Philosophy, and Catherine was in it. She was one of the schoolgirls. And so you want to know my memories of that scene in particular that day? Well, I have a few. First of all, I thought all the participants were so patient and brave because it was pouring rain. It was, I mean, you couldn't walk in the yard without stepping into deep puddles, and you had to put your costume on in the building right next door and come down a hill and, and then get into the School of Philosophy. And it was just, there was thunder and lightning and really a deluge of water. It was just, so you had to put up with a lot, Catherine, just to try to look tidy, and everybody looked great. They didn't look like they had just come through practically a swimming contest to get there. That stands out very strongly. I also was really impressed with the way Greta Gerwig directed all of you. I thought she was very gentle. She's a quiet director, and very in touch with the actors. And I would love it. And I know, Catherine, you may not want to say too much. Maybe you could just whisper to your dad if you'd rather. But did you feel that it was a very friendly atmosphere that Greta Gerwig had sort of created for that scene? Did you feel comfortable and people were friendly?
All right, say that again.
Sort of.
Sort of, yeah.
Were you a little bit nervous?
Well,
Yeah.
not really, because I didn't have anything to say and I was just supposed to really sit there.
Yes, that's true. That's true. But what did you think when you say sort of? You sort of thought it was comfortable, but what didn't feel so comfy to you?
I was sitting in the schoolhouse for hours and I was really hungry.
That's one of her memories is, yes, sneaking some bread. There was a prop loaf of bread out and she snuck bites between takes. And I think, yeah, they stopped filming so you could use the girls' room. I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, see that you're bringing up another element of what was tough about that night, because it was pouring rain, and that meant that taking a break, saying, okay, everybody, we're going out now, you can go and get a snack or whatever, would have been very difficult because you'd have been soaked and you'd come back and you'd look not like you looked a minute ago when you were, dry and being filmed. So that did make it harder. And they did have food, but it wasn't in the schoolroom, except for your prop bread. Well, you were very, very good-natured and patient to put up with all of that.
And Sarah says, how wonderful, you lucky girl, memories you will hold close forever. So thank you so much for your questions, Mark and Catherine. We have time for one more question. So if you have any more, just type them into the chat. So if you want to go ahead, Skylar, this will be our last question.
Oh, thank you so much. I found this through the Instagram page for the Orchard House. So thank you. The Orchard House, the Alcotts, has such a special place in my heart for me and my family. And I've loved everything that you've shared, Heather and Jan. Especially warms my heart to hear that Bob Odenkirk cared so much about Bronson and wanted to know all about his life. That really touches me. So my question, Jan, because I'm assuming that you know, you probably, if the way things go, there'll probably be another version of Little Women sometime in the future, and they'll probably ask you again to come and consult. But in a future version, are there any elements of the original novel and or just the Alcott family that you would like to see highlighted in the future that maybe have not yet been highlighted?
Oh, that's a big question.
I know. Sorry, like the biggest question right at the end, but
no, it's a great question. It's so all encompassing. I personally have always thought that what I call the forward thinking, the progressiveness of the Alcott family was so strong, and it does appear in Little Women, but by necessity, as one of the questioners already pointed out, that the editors were very strong. They wanted to sell books, and they didn't want too much slang, and they certainly wouldn't have wanted too many forward-thinking ideas that went too far astray from what their readers would appreciate. But I've always thought that the progressiveness of the Alcott, it sort of creeps in 94. You see a little of it there. You see a little bit of it more in Gerwig's version. But I guess I love the fact that they keep going in that direction. And I think you can find openings in Little Women and then go a little deeper because of who the Alcotts were and how they were. And that's exactly what I think both Gillian Armstrong did the 94. She was the director then, was doing that. And the scriptwriter, Robin Swycord. But then, of course, Greta both wrote and directed this version, and she was doing the same thing. I think she was looking for those openings in the book and then taking a little more liberty. I guess that's really what I have the most affinity for. I think Louisa May Alcott, but really her whole family. Her father was very progressive that way too. I mean, he built a desk for his daughter in an era when physicians actually said brain work will destroy a woman's health, and writing is brain work and you shouldn't be doing it. And besides that, it's not proper. And here he is just ignoring that. Mrs. Alcott gives her a pen. May this pen your muse inspire when wrapped in pure poetic fire. These were very progressive ideas. And so any place they can fit that in, I'd say go for it.
Thank you so much. That's a great answer. And I totally agree. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Skylar. And Leanne said, I think they just need to do an Alcott family biopic someday. Which,
I agree.
Yes. Thank you everybody for coming to our program, and all the international folks for coming as well. I'll pass it over to Gavin to say goodbye.
I just want to thank Heather and Jen for a wonderful conversation. I want to thank everyone for joining us from all across the world.